Once there was a dog named Maximum. He had been a loyal companion to his family, running around the yard and playing fetch. But one unfortunate day, Max was in a terrible accident that left him paralyzed. His back legs no longer worked, and the family was devastated. They took him to the vet, and after much consultation, the heartbreaking decision was made: Max would have to be put down. The family, though saddened by the loss, knew it was the kindest option for their beloved pet. But there was one member of the family who wasn't ready to say goodbye: an 8-year-old girl named Sophie. She had grown up with Max, and he had always been there for her, offering comfort after bad days and sharing in her joy during the good ones. Sophie couldn't bear to think of her best friend being taken away. The day before Max was scheduled to be put down, Sophie took a walk with him in the yard. She gently wheeled him in his cart that helped support his rear legs. As she strolled along, tears welled in her eyes, but suddenly, something caught her attention. A small, colorful ball rolled across the grass, and before she knew it, Max's ears perked up. Sophie hesitated. Could it be? Could Max still play? Without thinking twice, Sophie picked up the ball and tossed it a few feet away. Max, with all his might, tried to move. His legs wobbled, but slowly, with determination and love in his heart, he crawled toward the ball. Sophie gasped in awe. Max wasn't giving up. He was still trying, still pushing forward. Sophie ran inside and found her mom. "Mom, Max can still move. He's trying," she exclaimed. Her mom, though doubtful at first, came outside to see what Sophie had discovered. To their surprise, Max was slowly but surely making his way toward the ball. It was a slow, painstaking process, but the spark in his eyes was unmistakable. He wasn't ready to give up, and neither was Sophie. With new hope, Sophie contacted a special animal therapist who had helped other pets regain mobility. They started working with Max, using a combination of physical therapy and a custom cart to help him move more easily. It was a long road, but every day Max seemed to get a little stronger. Sophie's determination, her belief in Max, and her refusal to give up saved him from an untimely fate. Over time, Max regained more and more mobility. Though he would never run like he once had, he could walk with the help of his cart. Sophie and Max continued their adventures together, with Sophie always by his side, cheering him on. Max's story became a reminder to everyone around him that even in the toughest times, there's always a chance for hope and recovery. Sometimes, all it takes is the belief of one small person to change the course of a life. And Max? He lived the rest of his days happily by Sophie's side, proving that love and perseverance could overcome any obstacle. As the months passed, Max continued to improve, and Sophie's bond with him only grew stronger. But one fateful day, when Sophie and Max were out in the park enjoying the afternoon sun, a strange man appeared in the distance. Sophie had never seen him before, and neither had Maximum. The man was holding a small device in his hand, something that looked like a remote control with buttons. Sophie immediately felt uneasy, and Max's ears perked up, sensing the stranger's presence. Curious, the man approached them, smiling warmly. "Is that your dog?" he asked in a friendly tone. Sophie nodded, but she kept a protective hand on Max's cart. "Yes, his name is Maximum. He's my best friend." The man's smile widened. "I can see that. You've done an incredible job with him. I work with a special team of animal rehabilitation experts, and we've been following Max's progress. I think there's something that could help him even more." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. Could this stranger really help Max even more than they had already tried? Sophie was wary but also intrigued. "Help him more?" Sophie asked. "What do you mean?" The man took a step back and held up his device. "We have a new technology, a robotic enhancement that could give Max even greater mobility. It would help him walk more naturally, even without the cart. It's completely safe, but only a few people have been able to use it successfully. We believe Max could be one of them." Sophie stared at him, unsure. "But why Max? Why us?" The man lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Because Max's story has inspired many people, and we believe he has the potential to change the way we think about rehabilitation for pets. This device could give him a second chance at walking. But it's a risk, and you have to decide if you're willing to take it. Sophie's mind raced. Could this be the breakthrough they needed for Max? Would it really help him? She glanced down at her faithful companion, who was looking up at her with eyes full of trust. Sophie knew what she had to do. She stood tall and faced the man. Yes, she said firmly. We'll try. Max deserves a chance, and I'll do whatever it takes to help him. The man smiled and handed her a small brochure with the details of the device and the procedure. We'll set up an appointment soon. Just remember, this is a big decision. But I have a feeling Max is ready for it. As the man left, Sophie felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew that with Max by her side, they could face anything. Days later, they visited the specialized clinic where the new technology was tested. Sophie felt a new sense of hope as they prepared Max for the procedure. She held his paw, whispering words of encouragement as the machine powered up. The robotic enhancement would be attached to his legs, designed to help Max regain more mobility, but it wasn't without its risks. Sophie looked at Max, who wagged his tail, as if telling her he was ready for this new adventure. Would the device work? Would Max walk again without the cart? And what would happen to their bond as they ventured into this new chapter of their journey? Only time would tell, but Sophie was certain of one thing: as long as she and Max had each other, there was no obstacle too big to overcome. The story of Max was far from over, and together, they would face whatever came next. To be continued. The day of Max's procedure arrived. Sophie held his leash tightly as they entered the clinic, the hum of machines and the soft murmur of staff filling the air. Max's eyes were wide with curiosity, but Sophie could feel the nervous energy pulsing through him. She gently reassured him, whispering, "We're in this together, Maximum, whatever happens, we've got this." As they were led into a clean, bright room, a team of doctors and technicians greeted them. One of the specialists, a warm woman named Dr. Ella, explained the process. "This is a very experimental procedure," she said, "but we've had good results with it. The device will stimulate Max's muscles and nerves to help him regain more control of his movement. It's not a quick fix, but we're hopeful." Sophie's heart raced. She was scared, but she knew deep down that this was their chance. Max was depending on her. After a brief consultation, Max was prepped for the procedure. Sophie held his paw until the doctors gently led him away. "It'll be all right," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. It felt like an eternity before they finally called her back into the room. Max's recovery continued to amaze everyone. As the weeks passed, he gained more strength, and his ability to move became more fluid. Sophie had never seen him so happy. His tail wagged furiously whenever he spotted her, and the spark in his eyes was brighter than ever. But as Max's physical progress soared, Sophie started to notice something else. He was changing in ways she hadn't anticipated. One day, while they were out for a walk in the park, Sophie noticed Max sniffing around curiously. He seemed more alert than usual, his head tilting with fascination as he followed an unfamiliar scent. Then, in a surprising twist, Max's ears perked up as he bounded toward a large bush near the edge of the park. Sophie's heart raced. "Max. What is it, boy?" Max was not only walking and running again, he was investigating, exploring, doing things he hadn't done since before the accident. Sophie followed him, her heart pounding in her chest as she approached the bush. She could barely make out what Max had found, but as she stepped closer, she gasped. A tiny puppy, no older than a few weeks, was curled up in the brush, shivering and alone. Max stood next to it, looking up at Sophie as if to say, "Help him." Sophie knelt down, her heart swelling with compassion. She carefully scooped up the tiny pup, who was cold and frightened. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now," Sophie murmured, cradling the puppy in her arms. Max stood by her side, wagging his tail, as if he had been the one to lead her to this helpless creature. Sophie couldn't believe it. Max, with all the struggles he had faced, had somehow found the strength to help another. It was as if the rehabilitation not only healed his body but awakened something deeper inside of him, a sense of empathy and care for those in need. Together, Sophie, Max, and the tiny puppy, whom they named Buddy, made their way home. The pup quickly became part of their family. Max, who had once needed help, now helped another, and their bond grew even stronger. But Sophie had a feeling that Buddy's appearance was no accident. Something greater was unfolding. A few weeks later, Sophie received a call from Dr. Ella, the specialist who had helped Maximum. "Sophie, I have something important to tell you. Max's case is one of the most remarkable we've ever seen. But it's not just about his recovery, it's about what's happening inside him. We've discovered something extraordinary." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "There's a neurological aspect to his healing that we've never encountered before," Dr. Ella explained. "It's like Max's brain is rewiring itself in ways we've never thought possible. He's not just regaining physical strength, his emotional and mental abilities are becoming more advanced too." Sophie couldn't believe what she was hearing. Could Max really be changing on a deeper level? Was there something more happening here than a simple recovery? As if to answer her question, Max nuzzled Buddy, who had been growing stronger alongside him. The bond between the two was already unbreakable, and it seemed as though Max's incredible journey wasn't just about him anymore. It was about helping others, teaching Sophie and everyone around them that no matter how broken you are, there is always a chance for transformation. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set, Sophie took Max and Buddy for a walk through the park. She had no idea where their next adventure would take them, but she knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The love they had for one another was boundless, and together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. But something told Sophie that their journey was far from over. Max's incredible recovery was only the first chapter of a story that would inspire people everywhere. And as they walked into the fading light, Sophie smiled to herself. The impossible was no longer just a dream, it was their reality. The days that followed Max's remarkable recovery seemed almost surreal. Sophie and Max had grown inseparable, and with Buddy, their tiny companion, their little family was complete. Sophie felt like they were living in a dream. Max was walking, running, and even playing like he had before the accident. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his story, more to his transformation than anyone could have anticipated. One crisp morning, Sophie received an unexpected call. It was Dr. Ella again, and her voice carried an urgency Sophie hadn't heard before. "Sophie, I need you to come in as soon as possible," Dr. Ella said. "There's something you need to see, something that might change everything we thought we knew about Maximum." Sophie's heart raced as she glanced down at Max, who was resting beside her. She had 1,000 questions, but all she could do was nod. "I'll be there right away." When Sophie arrived at the clinic, Dr. Ella was waiting for her, her expression serious. "Come with me, Sophie," she said, leading her to a private room in the back. Inside, there were new charts, scans, and images on a monitor, all of which looked far more advanced than anything Sophie had seen before. Dr. Ella pointed to the screen. "What you're seeing here is Max's brain scans. They've been evolving in ways we've never seen in any other dog." Sophie leaned in, confused but intrigued. "What do you mean, evolving?" Dr. Ella explained. "Max's brain activity has increased exponentially. It's as if his mind is becoming more advanced, more aware. This type of neurological change is something we've only read about in rare cases of deep brain stimulation or even cutting-edge experiments. But this is something else entirely." Sophie's eyes widened. "Are you saying Max's brain is changing?" "Yes," Dr. Ella replied. "And it's not just his physical recovery, it's his cognitive function. Max is starting to exhibit signs of enhanced intelligence. He's processing emotions, thoughts, and even problems in ways we didn't think possible for a dog." Sophie's heart raced. Could Max actually be becoming more than just a dog? What did this mean for their future? Before Sophie could voice her questions, Dr. Ella added, "We need to be careful, Sophie. This kind of transformation is unprecedented. We don't fully understand what's happening, but it's clear that Max is evolving in a way that could have profound implications for both him and the world around him." The weight of Dr. Ella's words sank in. Sophie didn't know what to think. Was Max still the dog she knew and loved, or was he something else entirely now? Would his extraordinary abilities change their relationship? And what if there were dangers they hadn't even considered? Max, sensing Sophie's unease, nudged her hand with his nose, offering her his trademark gentle gaze. It was as if he understood everything she was feeling, and in that moment, Sophie knew that no matter what, Max would always be by her side. "I don't know what the future holds, Sophie," Dr. Ella continued. "But I do know that Max's story is far from over. This could be just the beginning of something world-changing. We may need to make some tough choices in the coming days." Sophie looked down at Max, who wagged his tail in that familiar, reassuring way. She didn't have all the answers, and she wasn't sure what challenges they might face in the future. But one thing was clear: Max had already overcome the impossible, and now, they were about to embark on an entirely new adventure together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of new tests, visits to the clinic, and attempts to understand Max's evolving mind. As his cognitive abilities grew, so did his curiosity. Max was more alert, more aware of his surroundings, and began to communicate in new ways. He would lead Sophie to things he wanted, touch certain objects to signal his needs, and even tried to talk to her by barking in patterns that she slowly learned to understand. But as Max's intelligence grew, so did the mystery surrounding his condition. Sophie began receiving calls from researchers, animal scientists, and even government agencies who had heard about Max's remarkable transformation. People were fascinated by what was happening to him, and some were eager to study him, perhaps too eager. One afternoon, Sophie and Max were walking in the park with Buddy when a black van appeared, parked on the edge of the street. Sophie's instincts kicked in. She didn't know who these people were, but she could feel the tension in the air. Max's posture immediately stiffened, and he stood by her side, as if he sensed something was wrong. Two men in suits stepped out of the van and approached Sophie, their eyes fixed on Max. "Sophie, is this your dog?" one of the men asked, his tone polite but firm. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "What do you want with him?" "We've been following Max's case," the man said. "We believe Max is a part of a very special phenomenon, one that could have global significance. We need to talk to you about possible collaborations." Sophie stood her ground, her protective instincts kicking in. "What kind of collaboration?" "Max is my dog, and has been through enough already. I'm not letting anyone take him." The men exchanged a quick look, but before they could respond, Max growled a low, warning sound that sent a chill down Sophie's spine. The men paused, seemingly taken aback. Sophie whispered to Max, "It's okay, boy. Let's go home." She began to slowly walk away, keeping her pace steady. The men watched them leave, but Sophie didn't dare look back. As they walked, Sophie's mind raced. Was Max really in danger now? Would people try to take him away for their own purposes? She had to protect him, no matter what. Max's story was no longer just about recovery. It was about something bigger, something that could change the world. And Sophie realized that the path they were on would lead to even more unexpected challenges. With Max by her side, Sophie knew they would face them together. Whatever the future held, they would face it as a team. Sophie's heart pounded as she walked away from the two men in suits. Max's protective growl still echoed in her ears, but she knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than they could have ever imagined. The strange men, the ominous van, and the mention of global significance weighed heavily on her mind. Sophie had never thought of Max as anything other than her loyal companion, but now she was beginning to realize that he was part of something much more complicated, something that involved not just his recovery, but the very fabric of science and perhaps even society itself. As they arrived home, Sophie made sure to lock the doors and close the curtains. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Max paced back and forth, his keen senses picking up on something Sophie couldn't quite detect. Buddy, the little puppy, curled up beside Sophie on the couch, unaware of the tension that hung in the air. Sophie tried to push the worry aside. They just wanted to talk, she told herself. They were probably just scientists curious about Max's recovery. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this than mere curiosity. The next few days were filled with unsettling silence. No one showed up at their door, and Sophie hadn't heard anything more from the men in the van. Still, she couldn't help but feel on edge. She kept a close eye on Max, who seemed to be more alert than usual, often staring out the window, as though he were waiting for something or someone. It wasn't until later that week that Sophie received an email that would change everything. The message was from an unknown sender, and the subject line simply read, "They're watching you. Don't trust them." Sophie's hands trembled as she opened the email. The content was short but chilling. "Max isn't the only one. There are others like him. You need to leave before it's too late. Trust no one. They're coming for him." Sophie felt a cold chill run down her spine. Who sent this? What do they mean by others like him? Her thoughts raced as she looked over at Max, who was now lying quietly beside Buddy, his eyes fixed on the door. His heightened awareness, his intelligence, it was all coming together now. The strange men, the cryptic message. Max was more than just a dog. He was part of something bigger, something that had drawn attention from forces Sophie wasn't ready to confront. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, her mind unable to rest, she heard a faint noise outside. It was the unmistakable sound of footsteps. She crept to the window and peered through the curtains, her breath catching in her throat. There, at the edge of the yard, were two figures standing in the shadows. Sophie's pulse quickened, and her first instinct was to reach for her phone, but then she remembered, the last thing I need is more attention from them. Max, sensing her unease, let out a low growl, his eyes narrowing. Sophie could see that he was alert and ready, as if he knew what was coming next. With Buddy nestled close to her side, she slowly backed away from the window, trying to think clearly. The figures didn't move. They just stood there, waiting. Sophie knew it was time to act. I have to protect Max, she thought, but she also knew that she couldn't do it alone anymore. She needed help, and fast. The next morning, Sophie called Dr. Ella, her voice filled with urgency. "I don't know what's happening, but something's not right. Max isn't just healing, he's changing in ways we don't understand. And there are people out there who are watching him. I need to know what's going on. What's happening to him?" Dr. Ella's voice was steady but serious. "Sophie, I've been doing some research. You're right. What's happening to Max is extraordinary, beyond anything we thought possible. But there are others like him, Sophie. They're part of a larger, classified program. I can't tell you everything, but you need to be careful. People are starting to notice Max, and they won't stop until they get what they want." Sophie felt her chest tighten with fear. "What do you mean by get what they want? What are they after?" "I don't know all the details," Dr. Ella admitted, her voice low. "But I've heard whispers of experiments, of people trying to replicate Max's recovery, trying to control it. If you want to keep Max safe, you have to leave. Don't stay where they can find you." Sophie's thoughts raced. Leave? How can I just leave? Max deserves a normal life. Where would I go? What should I do? Dr. Ella hesitated before replying. There's a place, a sanctuary, of sorts, for animals like Maximum. It's off the grid, hidden from the people who are trying to exploit these abilities. I can help you get there, but you have to be ready to leave everything behind. Sophie's heart ached. She wasn't ready to leave her home, her life, her friends. But she looked down at Max and Buddy, who were both looking up at her with unwavering trust. She knew what she had to do. As she hung up the phone, Sophie knew that their lives would never be the same again. The path ahead would be dangerous, and the world they once knew was no longer safe for them. Max's transformation had awakened something that drew the attention of powerful forces. And now, Sophie was forced to make the hardest decision of her life, to leave everything behind and keep Max safe, or risk losing him forever. With a deep breath, Sophie packed her bags, prepared to embark on the journey of a lifetime. The world was waiting, and so were the dangers lurking in the shadows. But one thing was certain, Sophie and Max would face whatever came next, together. Sophie spent the next few hours packing, her hands moving mechanically as she gathered essentials. Clothes, food for the journey, a few cherished mementos, nothing could stay behind. She had no idea where the sanctuary was, only that Dr. Ella had assured her it was a place of refuge, hidden from those who would exploit Max's abilities. But as Sophie looked at the life she was leaving behind, a deep sorrow filled her chest. She was saying goodbye to everything she knew, her home, her friends, and the safety of normalcy. Max seemed to sense her anxiety. He padded over to her, nuzzling her leg with his head, his eyes full of trust and loyalty. It was as if he understood that their world was changing, but he was ready to face whatever came next, so long as Sophie was by his side. Sophie knelt down, stroking Max's fur. "We're in this together, Max," she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "I'll never let them take you from me." With Buddy in tow, they set out. Sophie drove through quiet streets, her gaze constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. Every sound, every shadow made her jump. She knew she had to be cautious, but the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Max wasn't just a dog. He had become something far greater. The transformation was more than physical, it was mental, emotional, and perhaps even spiritual. After hours of driving through winding roads and unfamiliar territory, they arrived at a small, inconspicuous motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the night, its flickering glow casting eerie shadows. Sophie parked in front of the building, her fingers trembling on the steering wheel. This was it. The next step in their journey. She stepped out of the car, taking in her surroundings. The place was quiet, almost too quiet, and the air had a stillness that made Sophie uneasy. Max's heightened senses were on full alert. His tail was stiff, his eyes darting to the shadows, ever watchful. Buddy, the tiny puppy, was curled up in her arms, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. As Sophie walked to the front desk, a man in his late 40s stood behind the counter. He gave her a nod, his expression neutral but knowing. Sophie hadn't been told much about this part of the journey, but she knew enough to trust the process. "You're here for the sanctuary?" the man asked in a low, gravelly voice. Sophie nodded, glancing back at Maximum. "Yes. I need to keep him safe." The man's eyes flickered to Max, a look of recognition passing over his face. "Follow me," he said, leading her through a back door and down a long hallway that seemed to disappear into darkness. The air was cold, and the walls were lined with old, peeling wallpaper. It felt like they were stepping into another world, one where no one could find them, where they could finally escape. Max and Buddy stayed close to her, their instincts telling them this was a place where they needed to be cautious. Sophie could hear the faint hum of machinery in the distance, a constant reminder that the world she had known was now far behind her. At the end of the hallway, the man stopped in front of a large, steel door. He looked at Sophie one last time. "You won't be safe for long," he said quietly. "They'll be looking for you, and they won't stop until they find him. But in here, you'll have a chance. You need to decide, Sophie. This is your only chance to keep him safe." Sophie's heart raced as she considered his words. She had already risked so much to get here, and now she was being asked to make another difficult choice. She could go on the run, constantly looking over her shoulder, or she could trust the people behind the steel door. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. The man nodded and opened the door, revealing a large, underground facility. Inside, scientists and researchers bustled around, working with equipment that Sophie could barely comprehend. It was like a hidden world of discovery, one that had remained secret for years. "Here, you'll be able to keep Max safe," the man explained, guiding them further into the facility. "But you need to be prepared. This is where the answers to Max's transformation lie, and it's also where you'll be safest, for now." Sophie took a deep breath, looking around the sterile environment. There were no windows, no signs of the outside world, only the hum of machines and the bustle of activity. For a moment, it felt like they had entered a completely different universe, one where everything was controlled and nothing was left to chance. Max stood beside her, his tail low and his eyes scanning the room, ever vigilant. Sophie was sure he could sense that this place, like everything else in their new life, was a puzzle that had yet to be solved. As they continued deeper into the facility, Sophie's mind raced with questions. Why are they so interested in Max? What are they doing here? And how long can we stay hidden before the world finds us again? But for the first time in what felt like forever, Sophie allowed herself a moment to breathe. She had made it this far, and she would protect Max with everything she had. Whatever the answers were, they would find them together. And then, from the distance, she heard a voice calling her name. "Sophie, I need you to see something." She turned toward the voice, her heart skipping a beat. It was Dr. Ella. She was standing by a monitor, her face serious. "What is it?" Sophie asked, her voice shaky. Dr. Ella's eyes locked onto Sophie's with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You need to see this. Max is not the only one. He's part of a bigger plan. A plan that could change everything." Sophie's stomach twisted in knots. She had thought she understood what was happening, but this was something else. "Max is the key," Dr. Ella said softly. "But there are others. And they're coming." Sophie stood frozen, her mind reeling as the weight of Dr. Ella's words sank in. What does this mean for Max? For us? One thing was clear, their journey was far from over. And whatever was coming next, Sophie and Max would face it together no matter the cost. Sophie's heart raced as Dr. Ella's words echoed in her mind. Max is the key. It felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and the world as she knew it was suddenly much more complex and dangerous than she could have imagined. Max, her loyal companion, was at the center of something huge, something far beyond her understanding. She stared at Dr. Ella, trying to grasp what she was saying. "What do you mean, Max is the key?" Sophie asked, her voice shaky. "What's happening here?" Dr. Ella took a deep breath and motioned for Sophie to follow her. They walked down a corridor lined with high-tech equipment, the hum of machines filling the air. As they entered a small, dimly lit room, Dr. Ella gestured to a series of monitors displaying various animal brain scans. Sophie's eyes widened as she saw similar patterns that mirrored what she had seen in Max's scans before. "There are others, Sophie," Dr. Ella said softly. "Max is not the only animal who has undergone this kind of transformation. We've been studying a small group of subjects, and they all have the same neurological changes. But Max's recovery was unlike anything we've ever seen." Sophie felt a surge of confusion and fear. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner? Why didn't you warn me?" Dr. Ella paused, her face clouded with guilt. "We didn't know what we were dealing with. At first, it seemed like just a random occurrence, an anomaly, a fluke. But then Max's condition changed. It accelerated. And we realized. Max is the catalyst. He's the key to understanding how this transformation works." Sophie's mind spun. Danger. She looked over at Max, who was sitting quietly at her feet, his eyes fixed on her with a look of calm understanding. "He's just a dog. My dog. He doesn't deserve this. How can I protect him?" Sophie whispered, more to herself than to Dr. Ella. "You can't do it alone," Dr. Ella replied, her voice firm. "But there's one more thing you need to know. The others, these animals, are not just receiving neurological enhancements. The end." Sophie's heart raced as the road stretched out before her, the headlights of her car illuminating the dark, empty landscape. The weight of everything that had happened felt like a heavy cloak around her shoulders. Max sat quietly beside her, his eyes always watching, ever alert. Buddy, curled up in her lap, was the only comfort in the chaos of their world. They had been running for days, moving through the shadows, always staying one step ahead of the mysterious forces that were searching for Maximum. Each day brought more uncertainty, more fear, but also more determination. Sophie knew she couldn't stop, couldn't let them take him. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. Dr. Ella had been right. Max wasn't just a dog anymore. He was something special, something that couldn't be controlled. His transformation, though mysterious, had given him powers beyond what anyone could understand. And Sophie would fight to protect him with every ounce of her being. The device Dr. Ella had given her was a lifeline, something that would keep them hidden, help them stay off the radar. But Sophie knew it was only a matter of time before the people hunting them would catch up. They were persistent, and they wouldn't stop until they had Maximum. And Sophie knew, deep in her gut, that they were getting closer. As they pulled into a small, isolated town, Sophie looked at Max, who sat by the window, his eyes scanning their surroundings. "We can't stay here long," she whispered to him. "We need to keep moving." Max gave a soft whine in agreement, his gaze unwavering. Sophie pulled into a quiet motel, one of many they had stayed at on their journey, hoping to blend in and disappear. But she knew deep down that hiding would only be temporary. The people after Max were getting smarter, more relentless. They would find them eventually. That night, as Sophie lay in bed, her mind wandered back to the moment she first met Maximum. He was just a paralyzed dog, a broken animal no one thought could survive. But she had seen something in him that no one else did. She had believed in him, and now she had to believe in herself. She had already done the impossible. Max had survived against all odds. She couldn't let that be for nothing. Suddenly, a loud bang against the door jolted her awake. Max's ears perked up, and Buddy barked, his small body trembling in fear. Sophie's heart leaped into her throat as she reached for the tracker Dr. Ella had given her. The light was flashing red. They were here. Max growled lowly, his body tense, ready. Sophie's fingers shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed Dr. Ella's number. The line was silent for a moment before Dr. Ella's voice came through, urgent and calm. "Sophie, listen to me. They've found you. You need to leave now. There's a safe house nearby. I've already sent coordinates. Go. Get to it before it's too late." Sophie's mind raced as she looked at Max, his eyes locked on hers. "We don't have much time," she whispered to him. He barked softly, as if to say he was ready. She grabbed the bags, stuffing as much as she could into the duffel before running to the door. But as she opened it, she was met with the dark shadows of two men, standing tall, their faces masked by the night. They had found them. "Sophie, step away from the door," one of the men ordered, his voice low but firm. The other man was already moving toward Max, his eyes glinting with an unsettling gleam. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest. She backed up, pulling Max and Buddy behind her. Her mind screamed for her to act, but she knew there was only one way out. With a burst of courage, she turned and ran out the back door, into the woods that surrounded the motel. Max and Buddy followed, their speed and agility giving them an advantage. But Sophie knew the men wouldn't give up. They would chase them, no matter where they went. She ran through the woods, her breath ragged in the cold night air. The tracker was still flashing red, but she could hear the distant sounds of footsteps behind her, getting closer. Her thoughts were clouded with fear and adrenaline. "I can't lose him," she thought. "I won't." As the trees parted, they came to a clearing. And there, waiting for her, was a van. The side door slid open, revealing Dr. Ella, her face full of urgency and relief. "Get in, now," Dr. Ella shouted, holding the door wide. Without hesitation, Sophie jumped in, pulling Max and Buddy with her. The door slammed shut, and the van sped off into the night, leaving behind the dangerous men and the life they had been running from. As they drove, Sophie turned to Dr. Ella. "What happens now? What do we do next?" Dr. Ella glanced at her with a reassuring smile. "Now, Sophie, we start over. Max is safe for now, but the fight isn't over. There are still questions to be answered. But you and Max, you've made it this far. Together, we'll figure it out." Sophie looked down at Max, who lay quietly beside her. His transformation had been the start of something incredible. He was more than just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of survival, and of hope. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because Max wasn't just the key, he was the future. And Sophie would protect him with everything she had, no matter what. The end.